So a couple things, I didn't do all the textures on everything in here yet, but I did add some just so you can see the effects of having textures inside the scene. So little textures like this, like that, like the clouds, like this background go a long way. If you try to get too detailed, it looks pretty bad. Like this cloud here is like too cloudy, so you want to stick away from doing something like that. Keep it pretty generic, pretty soft if you're going to do that kind of thing. Well, not if, but when you do that kind of thing. For each one of the items, so let's say for cloud 3, which is not textured at all, okay, so it's just a plain brown shape of a cloud, I'm going to right click on it and pre-compose. Just like before, you could do everything in the same spot, but then you run the risk of having a million layers inside here. So we want to minimize how many layers we have in each comp. So I'm going to pre-compose it, I'm going to call it cloud. If I say move all attributes into the new comp, what will happen is it'll take all my 3D stuff and any animation I've done and put that into the new comp. And then anytime I want to edit it, I have to go into that composition. So what I want is just like, here's the cloud, here's the stuff, and then the animation is still in this composition. So for this, you would typically leave all of your attributes here, okay? So I grab my cloud, I double click it, so now the cloud is all by himself, he's not a 3D layer, he's just flat. Then I'm going to grab a texture. So I went online and found some textures. You know, you just want to have something in there. If you remember that video I showed about the Mrs. Nara with the cats and the gun thing, they're very like cardboardy, so you can actually find like cardboard things if you want to go with a specific style for your stuff. If you're just trying to create some generic stuff, obviously just find something that works. So something like this one could work for the clouds, or even that one I think I like better. So I'm going to drop it into my composition, and I'm going to do the one I showed before, which is taking this texture, setting the texture to be an alpha matte like this. Now that eliminated my texture. So when I hit undo, this texture gets, the color goes away. When I do an alpha matte, it's simply cutting out that image. I don't want to do that. I want to still have control of the color of it. I could go into my effect under color correction. I could add a color here and do it that way. That's another option. You could do it that way. Or I could turn my cloud on and then change the mode to color. And that way the color from my original one is on top of the other one. It's still cut out and it still gives me that ability to use it. When I'm back inside of my Angry Birds background, now this one will have a texture on it. And then if I want more, obviously I could duplicate this and have more of these moved around and animated and whatever else, okay? So that's how I did the texture for every single piece. It's simply a matter of grabbing the piece, pre-composing it, dropping the texture in, setting the alpha matte, and then changing that top mode to color, and making sure it's visible. If this is not on, and this is set to any of these, it won't show up. This one has to be on as well, okay? And then you can still adjust it. If I don't like the colors, I can then add a color correction inside there. Even inside here, I could duplicate one of my clouds, adjust the color some, that way I have some variety, and then go from there, okay? So don't think that everything is locked into one. Just think about what you want things to look like and then do that. On my Pantheon in the background, I did the same thing here. So I have my Pantheon and I have the texture there. And then what I wanted to do was, it looked kind of like static. So I wanted to have maybe just like a little border around it, some kind of outline. So I added a simple choker. So I just duplicated the top layer. Let me just turn this off so you can see the whole process. I duplicated the top layer, I set it to multiply. That makes the whole thing dark. And then I went to matte, simple choker, and then I just choked it, and that gives me this nice little like line around it. Again, it's just another level of detail that I could add on top of it. I could also add a gradient if I wanted to maybe soften some of my colors inside here too. Just think about all the different things that you could do to create these colors how you would want them to be, okay? So that's adding texture on top of this. Now I also wanted to create some sort of atmospheric clouds. I didn't want to go the route of using particular because particular is very processor sensitive. Like it's like intense how much stuff it's going to use. So I went online and I found a picture of clouds, this picture right here. And what I did was I drug it into my comp. So just for now, I'm just going to make a new composition so we can see this all by itself. There it is. Okay. I'm going to shrink this down, let's say to there. Okay. Now I did this in my original comp. I'm doing it in here just so you can see it without all the other garbage. I went into my pen tool and I just kind of outlined what I want my cloud shape to look like. So something like that. I'm keeping it pretty soft. I don't want to just click because that'll create hard edges. I then went to my mask and then I cranked up the feathering. And then you'll see this creates a nice little like cloud look to it without actually having to build clouds. It's just a flat image, part of it's masked off. Once I have this part that's all masked off, then I can just duplicate it and now I have more clouds and now I have more clouds. To get them to look more like clouds in my scene, because you'll see if I go back to this, I have it locked of course. Weird, it's not showing me any of my modes. So whatever. To get it to look more like clouds, like blended in, number one, I took the opacity down. But number two, I also played with the mode here, and I believe I chose soft light. Basically, you go through and you look at these and see like which one am I liking how this looks. And I think soft light. There you go. So soft light seemed like it worked pretty good. I could also maybe add in maybe an ad every once in a while. Maybe not too much. Take the opacity down. There we go. And what that will do is it's just changing how all of these clouds are blending together, so it feels more like a cloudy field versus a picture of clouds and a picture of clouds and a picture of clouds. Okay? So play with the mode, try to find the best one that looks like clouds if you want to add that kind of atmospheric look to your scene. That's that. Textures, cool. The rig on my Angry Bird. So I added onto the Angry Bird controller. Since we last talked, I added the squish down, the squish out, a control for the spear and a control for the spear rotation, and then a shield controller. Squish down and out are both angular. Basically, they're just numbers. I need to be able to grab a slider and just control how much it's squishing and how much it's stretching out, okay? And then for the spear, I need to be able to control the position of it and its rotation. So that's why it has two controllers. The shield doesn't matter where it's really rotated. It's more of a matter of where the position of it is, okay? So that's why I have those specific ones. The process is exactly the same for lining them up. Oops. I make sure this is locked. I make sure I'm back on my Angry Bird. And then it's a matter of, here's the shield. I click position. I alt-click and then drag that to that shield controller. That way I can control the shield from the other comp. I did the same thing with the spear. I call it arrow for some reason. There we go. So rotation and position, same thing. Lock them up. I adjust them so they're back in their positions. For the squish down and squish out, I want to have some way that this Angry Bird can give a little bit more feeling to him besides just this hard shape that moves around, right? So you want to have some way to kind of squish him out. When something squishes down, it should also squish out, right? And when it stretches up, it should also stretch inward, okay? So anytime I use this one, I'm going to use that one too. So the main one that those are controlling is body, okay? So now before I go on to the next step, let me ignore the stuff that's going to happen when I do this, but there you go. So his eyes are gone. So if I go here to my scales, which is what these are controlling, I have one, come on, just get a little bit bigger there. Oh, I can't do it yet, never mind. All right. I'll hit Alt-click on there. There we go, now I can make this bigger. And right now it's basically just transform scale. So this is where this gets a little bit, not advanced, just different, okay? Basically the X direction is going to go like this. The Y direction will go like that. So I have two scale values I need to control. So I'm not dragging it to one slider, I need to drag it to two sliders, okay? So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag the scale up to whichever one is first. Squishing left and right which is out, is going to be my out. So that'll be X. You'll see that this creates a little expression here. It'll say temp equals, and I'll copy this to a WordPad so you can see it, or Word. No, I want WordPad. I want that, whatever. It works either way, right? There we go. Okay, so it's a temp equals comp blah, 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 whatever that is. Basically, this is creating a variable, which is just a storage value that says whatever that value is, put it inside this word called temp, and then the X will equal temp and the Y will equal temp. Because we have two values, this is going to be my temp X, and then my temp Y will be the next one. And it'll be something like this. And instead of squish out, this would be squish down. Okay? Now, that's what it's going to look like. I'm going to show you in here how I can just get it to do that. Okay? So the first one I did was I drug it to the X, and that creates those. I put a little space. Oops, I don't want to erase that. Put a little space between them. Drag this to the other one. And then I just type in temp Y is this. Temp X equals that. And then I'm just changing the names down at the bottom to temp X and temp Y. Each line has to have a semicolon at the end of it. That way After Effects knows where the next line is. The last one doesn't, but we'll just put it there. Okay, so now I can control his squishing that way and his stretching this way. Okay, so that's controlling just his body at this point. All right. Now, once you get this point where you're like, okay, well now the body is squishing, we have to make some artistic decisions as to what is going to move with the body. Because each one of these pieces, like we talked about before, I can take the shield and I can control it separately. I can move the shield wherever I need to. I can move the spear wherever I need to, the eyes wherever I need to. I may not want to have all of those things need to be animated 100% of the time because that's a lot of work. So basically, when his body does this, when it squishes, I'm just going to advance because I do have some keyframes. When his body goes like that, in order for me to get everything in position, I have to move his eyes, his lines, his beak, his scar, or not a scar because that's on him, but everything has to move down with that. It's a lot of work for especially this kind of assignment, okay? Even his helmet, like that looks kind of weird. So I'm going to make an artistic decision that any of those items I'm just going to parent to the body and they'll automatically squish with him. With the exception of his shield, because that doesn't need to squish because that doesn't look weird when he's just squishing, and his spear, okay? So the helmet, the eyebrows, the pupils, the eye lines, the eye sockets, and both beaks all get parented to the body. And that's why they popped into the correct spot there, okay? Now, when you do this, after you've already done all your expressions, it may move the eyes and all the other stuff that you've controlled already. It may just shift them. No big deal. Just put them back where they go, okay? So now when he squishes, there you go, you can see how his body is squishing down and how his body is stretching out, okay? Now, his beak obviously wouldn't squish down like that. It would be a hard object. But for this, we're fine with that, all right? Cool. Now his spear doesn't move with him, that's fine. I'll adjust that later. The shield doesn't move with him, I'll adjust that later too. Those aren't huge things to have to move around. Every piece of his eye, that's a huge thing to move around, okay? So now I'm going to go back into the background and I'm going to animate the bird. So I already created the Angry Bird controller. I parented my Angry Spartan guy here to the Angry Bird controller. And now I want to animate. If I hit the play button at this moment, it's going to go super slow. So you can see how slow this is going. When you animate anything, you want it to go as quickly as possible. You want to make iterations. You want to put some keyframes down, see what it looks like. Put more keyframes down, see what it looks like. Tweak keyframes, modify, adjust these things. So what you want to do is hide all the stuff that is not necessary for this animation. So for animating the bird bouncing from one platform to the next, what are my items that I need? The bird and the platforms, right? So I'm going to hide all the other ones. So I'm going to leave my camera too because you can't hide that. So my clouds go away. My clouds down here go away as well. And then I will just turn on my bounce platform. So that should be the only things that I actually need for this animation to happen. So now I'm animating just this Angry Bird controller. And I'm going to save this as, so I don't ruin my perfect animation. Number 2. And I'm just going to delete all my keyframes that are inside here. All right. So now I should have nothing except my camera move. Yes. Okay. So you don't want to animate everything at once. I do not want to animate him rotating, position, squishing down and out, and his eyes, and all this stuff at once. Think of it as a layering process. The most important thing, the first important thing, is his movement. How is his movement there? Once his movement feels good, then I can come back and start adding in some rotations. Once the rotations are good, then I can start to animate the squishing. Once those are good, then I'll focus on the eyes. Once that's good, then I'll focus on the spear and the shield. Okay? So I never will go through and just frame 1, here's a million keyframes, frame whatever, here's another million keyframes. It's too much. Not just for beginners, for everyone. So I'm going to go where I think he should start moving. So you'll see I have about a 1 second where nothing happens. That's fine. About here, that's where things are going to start happening. So at about there, I want him to start moving. So I'm going to go to my position. I'm going to set a keyframe. And I'm going to let the camera do the work. We already kind of set this up. Mentally, we know how fast the camera is moving. We kind of have an eyeball of how far things are going to be going. So I'm going to go up to, let's say, about here, and just scoot him over. That's where his first jump will happen. He'll just go like that. And then about the same distance, he'll have another one. Now I have to make sure I'm not moving him in the X or in the Z direction, like towards the camera, because that obviously wouldn't be good. I'm going to go up a little bit further, and then he'll be there. Okay, now I could throw the cave on too. I don't think that'll hurt anything, and that'll give me an idea of where the cave is at. All right, that looks pretty good. So now I can hit play. Now watch how much faster this is going to play back compared to what we just had a second ago. Okay, so what I'm looking for here is that it doesn't feel like he's like rushing during some jumps and then going super slow during other ones. Okay, consistency from one keyframe to the next to the next. That's all I'm looking for. Pretty good. Okay, a little bit right there at the end, but I can adjust that just by pulling this back a little bit. All right, so that looks pretty good like that. All right, so now that I have his X position, now I can go in here and set his Y position. So I'm going to go, makes it easier for you. I go right in the middle of these two keyframes and just scoot him up. That's it. Now when he gets here, I'm going to leave this just so you can see it. I'm going to scoot that up again. Go here and scoot that up again. Okay. So now this is not good. It needs tweaking, but you tell me what needs tweaking. So what needs tweaking in there? The bounce is too smooth, right? I'm pretty sure they mentioned it in the video, but because I stepped out that day, I'm not 100% sure. But I'm sure they mentioned at some point that some things will have an ease in and ease out, and some things will have a hard stopping point, right? So when the bird is lifting off the ground, that's going to be his fastest, okay? The second he's pushed off the ground, that's his fastest. It cannot be anywhere else, because if it's faster at the top, then he would keep moving, right? He pushes off, he goes super fast. When he gets to the top, he slows down because gravity is kicked in and he's basically at an equal area. As he starts falling again, right before he hits the ground, he's going his fastest. Okay, he doesn't know he's going to stop because he doesn't know that the ground is going to stop him. So we have to make him stop right on the ground. So anytime we have a coming off the ground or hitting the ground, those should be square hits or sharp hits. Right now these are very pointy, so I want to click on the handles, and I have to remember which one After Effects is. I believe it's Alt. Yes, it is. There we go. So Alt allows me to drag the handlebars off of there. Once we've broken it once, we don't have to hold Alt for the other one. So see how these are now pointy? When he hits the ground, that should be like a boom hit, not a slow hit, okay? So I'm just going to hold Alt and break each one of those. Why didn't you break? Yep, that's the path of the bird moving. And then there's one right here, but my controller is on it, so I just need to move him up a little bit so that I could then adjust that. There we go. Okay, so now let's watch that again. Now it feels like he's actually hitting the ground, right? This is why we want to focus on one thing at a time, because if I had rotation and squash and stretch and all these other things in there, it gets very confusing as to what is actually causing the issue. So boom, 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 perfect. Okay, now if I really wanted to exaggerate this some, because we have this in there, let's just say I'm really exaggerating this. Okay, I can really kind of push this like that. I'm going to undo this because this is way too much exaggeration for this, but and then kind of subconsciously, I'm looking at these dots. The dots are each frame. If I see one of these hills that has a lot of dots and the other one has a very little amount of dots, I want to correct that too, because that means that there's a difference in speed. Especially the speed going up a hill and going down a hill, that should be about the same, okay? So if I see like on this side it's a lot, on that side it's not many, I'll adjust it. It's basically just where this keyframe is here. Watch as I adjust this. You can see how few dots are here and how many dots are there. So that will cause it to do something weird. First we'll watch it with this exaggeration, then we'll watch it with the bad speed. There you go, boing. So, not wonderful. Now let's watch it with a different speed inside here. Okay? So now this is what a bad one would look like. Okay? So right away you can tell. Now if you're not sure, you're like, I don't know, maybe the keyframe should be here or there, go further than you think it should go. If you're like when I move this back, maybe it should be over here, maybe it should be over there. Well, just move it further than you think you need to, and then look at it. Because what that does, visually, we have this kind of image baked into our eyes of what this animation is looking like. So as we watch something over and over and over again, we're getting basically desensitized to what we're seeing. So you have to basically like go crazy with it just to reset, and then you can kind of hone it into where you think it should be. Gorgeous. All right, now I'm just going to do all that because I want my small hills again. Cool. Now, this is an angry bird. He has a soul and a body, and one day he'll go up to heaven, I'm sure. If this was a bouncing ball, every time the ball hits the ground and bounces, that ball's height is going to get less and less and less because the ball has no control over its bounce. Where here, the angry bird is projecting himself up and down, okay? So the fact that all three of my hills are about the same height is fine. If this was, again, a bouncing ball, I would actually want to lower each hill so that it wasn't as much. All right. Cool. So I'm happy with his X movement. I'm happy with his bounces. Yep, that's good. The camera looks like it's good as far as everything lining up. Remember that I have it set up so that before he goes to the next bounce, I can see a little bit of that platform so that he actually like lands, or like we can see what's going on. I don't want it to be too crowded where he's like on top of that area. If it was like that, I can grab all my keyframes and just scoot them forward a little bit. Okay, and now what will happen is the camera moves and then he's moving with it. So now he's more like in the center of the frame, and he kind of arrives at a different spot, okay? Again, a good reason to kind of set this stuff up ahead of time in increments. All right, so position's good. Now I need to deal with rotation. I have not touched any of these yet. I've basically just been focusing on the main position rotates. So now I'm going to go to my rotation. I need to have my position also up so I can see that where he starts. Okay. So now he's about to rotate here, okay? So before he starts rotating, I need to set a keyframe. Then he's going to start rotating and then get into his jump, okay? So I'm going to zoom in so we can see this a bit. And right before this first keyframe, I'm going to set a keyframe for, I believe it's the rotate Z. Yep, that's the one. So we'll set a keyframe here. And then right about there, he's going to be rotated. Okay, now you can't see his spear. Let me change my background color so we can see that. There we go. Not that it matters, but just so you can see it. Okay, so now he goes like this. and then he's rotating. Now, if this wasn't a bouncing ball, what would happen is the ball would roll the entire time. It would basically continue going the same direction. Because this is a character with control of his own limbs, he would not want to go upside down. So he would rotate towards the bounce, and then when he gets in the middle of the air, he's straight, and then when he gets to the bottom, it's like his feet are landing, okay? So it would be, imagine this is the Angry Bird. He leans towards his bounce, he comes up, and then he hits. And then he leans towards his bounce, comes up, and then he hits, okay? So at the bottom of each bounce, he's going to be like this, exactly like that, every single time. When he gets to the top of this, right about here, he's going to be back to being no rotation at all. So he'll be back to being just straight up in the air. When he almost hits the ground right there, he will be rotated backwards, like this. And then when he goes forward again, he will be rotated the other way. Okay, so this is what one of our bounces will look like. Okay, so now it's feeling again like he's actually in control of this. We get a sense of motion. We go to the top of this, set this back to 0. We go to the end of this. Very repetitive at this point because it's just the same thing over and over again. And again, if this was a bouncing ball, all of these things would still be enacted. It would just be a different kind of animation. And then we get to the top of the hill, and this goes to 0. And then we go here, and then that rotates back. And then he's landed, so he's back to, 0. There we go. All right, so now we preview this. Cool. All right, so that looks good. Awesome. Now, here's a quick way to do that instead of doing it the way I did it. If you've done this before, you know where the keyframes are going to be. So I know that this keyframe right here of him being at 0 perfectly straight up and down, it's going to happen right at the beginning, right at the end. So if I go right at the beginning, right at the end, and I just paste that keyframe. I've copied it and I paste it. Where else is he going to be straight up and down? In the middle, right? So if I just go to the middle, paste the keyframe, paste the keyframe, paste the keyframe. Cool. So now he's straight up and down. So right here before he jumps, which direction should he be facing? Right. Okay. So every time right before he jumps, he's facing the right. So now I do the same thing. I go where he's about to take off, and I paste, make sure I copy one keyframe, not all of them. There we go. And then I paste it, and then I go up to right there, and I paste that. This one could probably be scooted over just a hair. There we go. I apparently did not copy that keyframe. Paste, yes, there we go. There we go, okay. So now that's good. So he goes, all right. And then right before he hits the ground, which direction is he facing? Left. So go there, grab the keyframe, copy it, and then we do the same thing right before that. He's facing the other direction. Very similar animation, right? Now, the disadvantage of doing something like this is all my values are exactly the same. So there could be, it's too static. I could go back and tweak them if I need to. That's where the graph editor is really handy, not the speed graph, but the value graph. Because here I can click on just the Z rotation, and I can just move that Z rotation straight down or straight up. And what this does, it just gives me a bit of randomness inside there, so they're not all the same. I can also grab these and make these easy ease. It may not be fantastic when I do that. These up here, the position, with the curve, we already did the easy ease, so we don't need to worry about those. But with the rotation, we want to at least see what it looks like. Yeah, it looks a little bit too staticky or too wobbly for me. So I'm just going to go back to keyframe interpolation and set this to linear. Yeah, I like the way that looks. So I'm going to stick with that one. Cool. So now I'm happy with the way that turned out. Now I would start to work with my squash and stretch. Okay, I got positions set up, I got rotations set up. Now it's time to squash him and stretch him. I want to have these showing, and then I can go into here and start to set this up. Now if you're not sure of where these go, just take a minute, write it down on paper as to where you think he'll be squashing and where you think he'll be stretching. Write down just like a storyboard or a little like flip book type thing, a little animation of where you think each one of these would be. Or if you go to Google and you type in bouncing ball animation, you will find Animatino. There you go. You will find plenty of images that show where the ball squashes and stretches. And you'll see, very similar to the rotations, that anytime he's rotating back or forward, he's going to be stretched out. Anytime he's hitting the ground, he's going to be squashed flat. And anytime he's at the top of his hill, he's going to be perfectly round. Okay? Always. So, very similar setup. So, I'm going to go to my squash down and squash out. Now, these are going to be always used in conjunction. Anytime he goes in, he will come up. Anytime he goes down, he will go out. Okay? Otherwise, he looks really weird. All right. So, right here at the beginning, he should have no squash at all, right at the very beginning. So, I'm going to go right here. I'm going to set my start keyframes for those. Now I can hit U so I can see all the keyframes together. Right before he jumps, right about here, right before he jumps, he should be squashed out and squashed down. There he goes. Now he is going to intersect the ground a little bit more. That's fine. It's a cartoon. Nobody cares. Okay, so here he goes. Now right after he leaves the ground, he's going to be stretched out. Now don't be alarmed if you don't catch on to this right away. I have people in 3D animation that do the same thing, because we do a bouncing ball doing the exact same thing. So there we go. And you can feel it too, right? When you feel that first bounce, like it feels a little bit like he has some sort of surface or substance or volume to him. He gets right to the top of this. He's back to being at 100 here and 100 there. Then we go right here to the beginning. Right before he hits the ground, he is stretched out this way and squished in this way. Now, how far do I go? I'm just eyeballing it. I'm just kind of like, if this one's 110, then this one's 90, about. Don't try to type them in. Don't try to get them accurate. Just about. You'll feel it afterwards. If you see he's bouncing and you're like, well, he looks really skinny here all of a sudden. He looks like he lost some volume. Then you can go back and just tweak stuff. But for now, just kind of set some keyframes to start it off. All right, so that's it. Boom, boom. So then you would do that throughout the entire animation. Now, because I like to do things the easy way, that whole animation is already set up right there. So my next keyframe here, he would be stretched out again, right, like that. And then he would go back to a round ball, and then he would be stretched out, and then he would be squished, and then he'd be flat, right? So all of that is already right here. So if I copy this animation, I go to about this point, and then I just paste it, it's already set up. I just have to move my keyframes. Okay, so that these are still lined up with this, because that's the middle. And then these are still lined up with that. And then I go to the end of this one, and then I paste it in again. And then I just adjust where my keyframes are at. Now, if you want to set them one at a time, do them one at a time. That's fine. Okay, and then at the very end, he's still rounded or squashed. So we set that to 100, and there we go. Okay. So now if we watch this again, boing, boing, boing. Cool. So that all works. All my stretches and bounces work. If something's off, you'll see it. If you look for it. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. Okay. That was a little bit too subtle. There's definitely something weird right there. That's good. right there. Okay, now if we go slower, you can see it happen. Right here, he's straight up and down. He should be squashed, obviously. And then right after he leaves the ground, somehow he squashes, right? So that's where, okay, something's going on here. He's squashing at the wrong time. Here are those keyframes. Let me line them up. And what you'll see is that there's a definite pattern as to how these keyframes are being set up. There's one jump. There's the next jump. There's the next jump. And then these are my middles. Okay? So once you get a little more comfortable with it, you'll see these kind of patterns evolving. And then, of course, that looks kind of stupid how he lands and just stops. So we should have just a little bit of, like, follow-through. So I'm going to go, let's say, right. I'm going to scoot this keyframe down some. And then just make him rotate a little bit further past the keyframe here. And then I'll also maybe squish him down a little bit right at the end. So I will take these keyframes. Something is funny. There we go. All right, so now that's going to feel like he's hitting a little bit better. Okay, we should always have that follow through of the animation of what's going to happen afterwards. It's not just like it just stops. That doesn't happen in the real world. So, boom. A little bit abrupt still. I probably pull these points out a little bit further. Come on. I probably got to zoom in because they're so close together. Yep. Come on, just scoot over. There you go. There we go. That feels better. Okay. All right, so now I have the bounces, I have the roll, I have the squishing and squashing. I'm happy with all the stuff that's happened so far. So now I would start to go through, and then I would do the pupils. The eyebrows are kind of like a last thing. I don't really worry about those too much at the start of it. But then I would go through and look at the pupils. And these can be very difficult to do if you're not paying attention to what you're trying to show off. So if you were to jump off of a cliff, you wouldn't just be looking down, you kind of be looking in the direction that you're moving, right? So that's what we're going to be doing with the eyes, is having them look where he's moving. So right here, I'm going to set some pupil keyframes. I will scoot up until he's squashed like this. And then I will adjust his position. Oops, that's not the right one. Now you can see that they're pretty subtle as to how far they're moving, so you don't want to go too crazy with this. Okay, so like that. So that's definitely better of an eye position than it was when he was looking straight ahead. Okay, now when he gets here at the top, you don't want him looking up anymore, he should be looking back down. So then I would rotate his eyes, or move his eyes so they're facing back down. Whoops, wrong way. There you go. You have to move them together, right? There you go. And then the same thing, his eyes would then be going back up, going back down. You should not have a million keyframes for the eyes, otherwise they'll like twitchy, okay? And then I would do the spear, then I would do the shield, then I would do whatever at that point, okay? Once you have the main structure, it really doesn't matter if I did the shield at this point or the spear or whatever. I just want to adjust, or have the main stuff set up first. Cool. So that's the animation. Then I turn everything back on. There's all my stuff. I make sure that I have motion blur on the appropriate items that should have motion blur, like my Angry Bird stuff. Actually, all my clouds that are moving too, anything that might be animated in the background. Whoops. His eyes just disappeared. Because I clicked the wrong button. I did not click motion blur. There's motion blur. There we go. So now I will have some motion blur. Cool. All right, and then that's pretty much it. You go and add your sound effects. You can add your sound effects in here if you want, or you can take your Angry Bird composition, which is this one. You can drop it into a new composition. That way it's all flat. It's all one thing, and then you can add your sound effects there if you like. That way it's a little bit neater. You can also do things like adding a vignette if you want to add a little bit more style to this. So I'm going to eyedrop this background color here. I like that one. And then I'm going to add just a an ellipse in the center, like so. I'm going to invert it and then feather it out and then expand it. And then what this does, it gives you kind of like a little filtery look on it. And then I can switch my mode to multiply. And now it gives me this kind of like neat vignette on top of my Angry Bird. Okay, again, something you would do after you've comped it in there. Okay, once you have the sound effects, you have whatever you want the end result to look like, then you add your title to it, and then you render out the item. Okay, that part I've gone over before, so we don't need to see that again. Wonderful. Okay, step away from it before you actually render out your final one. Look at it again. Obviously, if you have 5 seconds of nothing happening at the end, you want to cut that. Cool. Maybe you want to animate the clouds. I didn't animate these clouds moving in the background. I could definitely do that. I mean, they're kind of moving, but maybe a little bit more. Now, one of the reasons that I added these clouds in mine is because my Pantheon, it was getting cut off a bit at the bottom. So I added the clouds in there to kind of hide that and cover it up. You may want more mountains, whatever you're using. Cool. All right, so that should wrap up this one. Questions on that one? Yes, ma'am. You would do separate controllers for separate characters. That's the easiest way to do it, because let's say a year from now you're like, I want to animate this character. Pull out those 2 items, drop it into the new one, right? Anything else? Yes, ma'am. That's just a separate controller that I created. Mm-hmm. I think you walked in after that. Yeah. Yeah, it's in there. Okay. Oh, and one more thing you could add to this too. Remember, we have adjustment layers as well. So you could add an adjustment layer on top of all of this and do some color correction if you wanted to do another level of adjustments to it. So I can add, let's say, a curves, and maybe really pull up some of the contrast in it so that it's not just the same colors that I had before. So there's the before and after, right? A little bit more dramatic. You could also go and add a hue and saturation to it. Maybe I want to give this a little bit of an adjustment. Oh, that's kind of neat. Or I can desaturate it a bit there. That's kind of cool, right? Okay, so you can do adjustment layers too and play with those kinds of things. Right. Awesome. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am?
Way back at the beginning when you adjusted the path that he was actually stomping on,
Right.
how did you get into that?
The second I just clicked on this thing to see it, where it's controlled, that automatically popped up.
Okay, and then with the move tool,
Mm-hmm.
you can control the point.
Yep, so I'm just clicking right on there, and then it gives me the handlebars, and then I can do whatever I want with them.
You've got the layer selected, handling on control.
Yep. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. You may have, in your character, you may have different facial shapes you want to go to. Instead of a transition of just the jaw rotating or the eyes blinking, you may have something special you want to add to it. So let me open up my Angry Bird right there. Yeah, I'll worry about that later. So in here I have my beak. There it is. There's my beak shape. So let's just pretend that I have several beak shapes that I want to transition between. Eye shapes, mouth shapes, it doesn't matter, okay? The process is going to be exactly the same no matter what you want to do. For this, just to keep it simple, and so we can obviously see what's happening here, I'm just going to go into a brand new document so we can see this. I'm going to turn off my transparency grid, and I will use numbers so we can see this process happening. So this will be number 1. I'll make a new layer. This will be number 2. I'll make a new layer. Each one of these will be on a separate layer, and that will be number 3. So all of these will be aligned there, there. That's a horrible alignment after Illustrator. There we go. Then we'll throw this right there. Okay. So 1, 2, and 3, they're stacked on top of each other. I should probably, they're already labeled 1, 2, 3. That's fine. All right, so I'm going to save this as 1, 2, 3 Illustrator. Yes. All right, so I'm going to import my stuff here. Artwork, 1, 2, 3. Same thing as before, composition, retain layer size, import, and go to this. Okay. Background color is different than my text, so let me just change this. And let me make that bigger so we can actually see it. Also look for, if I scaled this up, it's going to look horrible. So I would click that continuously rasterize, and then it doesn't look horrible. There we go. So now I have layers 1, 2, 3. I need to find a way that I can cycle between layers 1, 2, and 3. So imagine layer 1 is eyes closed, layer 2 is eyes open, layer 3 is eyes like halfway, whatever it is, okay? I'm going to take each one of these layers and only show them for one frame, okay? So I'm going to go up to one frame here, and I'm going to grab all my layers, and I'm going to Alt right bracket it. And that cuts each one of the layers so they're only visible for one frame. And then I'm just going to offset each one so there's no overlap. There we go. So there's one. All right. There we go. There we go. So there's 1, 2, 3. There we go. Okay. So now what I need to do is go between these. Now, if you wanted to do it the straightforward method, you could simply just take layer 1, show it for as long as you want, cut it, and then show layer 2 for as long as you want, then cut it, then show layer 3. The issue is when you go back to layer 1, you have to duplicate layer 1, and then duplicate layer 2, and then duplicate layer 3, and you may have 50 copies of these. Imagine a character who is lip syncing, they're talking about something. It's more than just like the one time you're going to use this, okay? So I've laid out all these, 1, 2, and 3. There they are. And I'm going to set my workspace to just these 3. So if I hit play, it'll just do that. And then I'm going to trim my comp. Okay? So now I have a composition, which I am going to call number sync. Sure. And then I'm going to drop this into my Angry Spartan. For whatever reason, he has a number on his forehead. Okay? There we go. It's going to go right there. This is how many lives he has. Maybe we'll do that. Right there. That looks like a good spot for it. We'll do that. Okay. So I have this. Now if I hit play, it does that and it goes away. 1, 2, 3 and goes away. I'm going to right click, go to time, and say enable timer mapping. Timer mapping allows us to tweak what the time is. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be adjusting my time that I'm viewing from the other comp in this composition. So I know that the beginning is frame 1, and then frame 2, and then frame 3. I can now stretch this out. And now when I see these, there's 1, 2, and 3. So let's say, oops, this one here is frame 3. So I'm going to set a keyframe on that and then just delete this other one. So if I type in 0 for this time remap, it's going to be number 1. If I type in 2, it'll be number 3. And if I type in 1, it'll be 2. Obviously, that's confusing. But just if they weren't numbers, it wouldn't be as confusing. Okay. So if I just take this number 3 and I pull it all the way over here, and I take this number 2 and I pull it all the way over there, this should stay number 1, and then 2, and then 3. Okay? And then if I want to go back to number 1, I can just type in 0. And if I go to number 2, I just go here and type in 1. And if I want number 3, I just go to where I want number 3 to happen, and I type in that. Oops, sorry, 2, not that. Okay, so now I can cycle between the numbers here. And then when I get to this point, you'll see how it goes to number 1. And then it'll switch to number 2. And then it'll switch to number 3. Okay? So it's automatically switching between these based on these keyframes. Now you'll notice that between these two, it actually switched, like in the middle of it. Okay? What's happening is it's transitioning. It's going from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, whatever it is. If I right-click on this and set my keyframe interpolation, oops, sorry, if I go to toggle hold keyframes, it will hold the keyframe. So basically it'll say, whatever this keyframe is, hold it until you get to the next one. So now it'll go to there, now it'll go to there, now it'll go to there, and then there, and then there. So now let's pretend that I get rid of these, or let's actually do it. And then I'll just have a square here, and then I'll go to layer 1, and I'll have a rounded square, and I'll make a different color. Oops. Okay, so that's on layer 1, then I'll go to layer 3, and I will create a different item. I'm just going to save this and then come back into here, and then there we go. Okay. So very easily we can swap between those different shapes. So if these were different eyes, we're basically switching between the different eyes. If they're mouth shapes, we're switching between different mouth shapes. And wherever we're at, we just kind of take that keyframe. Like right here, I want a square. I go and I type in the number that is square, and then there's my keyframe. And then I will toggle hold keyframes. Oops. So then it'll go to this, and then boom, square. Okay, so that's how you would do some sort of lip syncing or swapping between different shapes.